Let's take a closer look at the chain. I've made a big chain out of some roving to make it easier to see. At the end of the video on how to make the chain, I talked about the V. That each V was a stitch. But each stitch also has a back side, and the back looks like this. I like to call these humps. Every stitch has a V on the front and a hump in the back. So essentially there are 3 parts to every stitch of the chain. And for the purposes of this class, I'm going to call them the left side of the V, the right side of the V, and the hump. So when we're talking about where to stick the hook to get past the chain, we're going to talk about where in the chain do we need to make the next stitch. So there are 3 ways to stitch into the chain. The first is to stitch into the V. So you're going to stitch underneath these 2 parts of the V between the V and the hump. So we're going to go under the first leg of the V and the second leg of the V, and I always have to use my fingers on this one because this is the most difficult of the 3 to learn. So you see my hook's under the V and it's under the hump, so it's between the 2. And so if I were to make a stitch, I would be pulling the yarn through that hole. So let me demonstrate that real quick. Under the first part of the V, under the second part of the V, and then it's under the hump too. So I'm going to get a different color of yarn so you can see this. So when you stitch into the top of the chain, it looks like this. I'm going to show you with some yarn. So I'm going under both of the V's, and there's my hump on the back side. I'm just going to do a couple of stitches to show you what it looks like. In the next lesson we'll learn how to make this stitch, so I'm just going to do what's called a single crochet and a couple of stitches just so you can see what it looks like once you've stitched into it. So I went on one side of the V, and now I'm going in the other side of the V. Here's my hump on the back side. And then pull it through. Let's do one more. Going on one side of the V, and then the other side of the V. And I always have to use my fingers on this one. So there's the hump on the back. And then we're pulling the yarn through. So this is what it looks like after you've done a couple of stitches on the top of the chain. So here's the bottom. All of our humps are exposed. And then the top. So you can see where the stitches that I haven't stitched into look like. And then this is what the stitches that I have stitched into look like. See, you can kind of see the V's here. It's a little bit hard because it's a smaller yarn. But that's what it looks like to stitch into the chain, into the top of the chain. So this is the traditional way to stitch into the chain. The next way is to stitch into the side of the chain. When you stitch into the side of the chain, you go from one side of the V and then into the hump in the back. So under the hump, under one side of the V, under one side of the hump in the back. So let's look at that again. We're going to go under one side of the V and then the hump in the back. We've left this side of the V empty. So let's do a couple of stitches with that. One side of the V and the hump in the back. This is really one of the easiest ways if you need to stitch into 2 pieces of the chain. This is the stitch, this is what got me started crocheting. After I learned how to stitch into the side of the chain, crochet just made so much more sense to me because I could actually get my hook into the chain. It's really difficult to get your hook into the top of the chain. So here's what that looks like whenever you stitch into the side of the chain. So these kind of look like the hump in the back when we stitched into the top of the chain, but they're really the side of the chain. See, you can see our unworked stitches. and see how the stitches are working in the top and the side of the chain. So this is what it looks like to work into the side of the chain. And you can very clearly see, since I worked into this big roving, that it is the side of the chain because you can see the V's. But see, once you work into it, you can't see the V anymore. So let's try the last one. And the last one is to turn over your piece, and you're going to stitch into the humps in the back. So you're going to leave these two open and stitch into the hump. So this makes a really nice edging if you're doing like a blanket or something that you want to have two finished edges on. So for this one, you just put your hook underneath the hump, and there you have the two V's in the back. So the V's are going to be your bottom, not the humps. So I'm going to do just a couple of stitches here just to show you what it looks like. I'm going under the hump, and then I'm making a stitch. Go under the hump, and then I'll make a stitch. So this is what it looks like when you stitch into the humps. So I have 3 stitches here, and then this is the other side. So if you were to say create a sweater with this is your bottom and you're working up this way, this would be a nice finished edge. And so if you wanted to put some scallops or a border on it, this is a really great way to do that because you have a nice finished edge that once you start to work into, I can work something into the top, and it's a lot easier to put my hook in because this yarn is already made the hole for me. So it's a lot easier to hook into this side of the chain now than it was whenever we first began. So I'm going to make this video with some smaller yarn so you can just see what it looks like for yourself. I just wanted to demonstrate it with this big roving just so you could see the stitches, because I wasn't being able to see the stitches as well with the little yarn as I was with the big yarn.